It is Throwback Thursday, which means it's time to dive into our vast CBC archives. The first week of college or university is often exciting, but it can be downright worrying for some students who are trying to find a place to live. The concern is not new in BC. Take a look at the story from 43 years ago when student housing was just as hard to come by.
The apartment vacancy rate in Vancouver is the lowest in the country, nearly 0%. And what is available is very expensive. A bachelor apartment can easily cost $350 to $500 a month. And rooms in private homes are also very expensive.
It would seem that prices are up generally 25 to 35%. That may be a reflection of mortgages that people are having to renew, or it may be some instance of people believing that the market supply situation allows them to charge more for accommodation.
Another problem facing students is the severe shortage of dormitory housing. At the University of BC, 7,000 students have signed up for on-campus housing. There are beds for only half that many. Simon Fraser University has 1,500 applications for 220 beds. At UBC, they've distributed 50,000 copies of this flyer, begging people to put up a student. New listings are posted every day, but many of them feature accommodations that are less than desirable. What are you getting $475 in one of these basement suites?
Just a room, that's it. You might have to share a bath, or you may have your own bathroom. Nothing else, no cooking.
No, not even a hot plate or anything?
Not even a hot plate. This is just a room, a sleeping room, bedroom.
But not all students are having to settle for minimum housing at maximum prices. Laurie Knapp from Mississauga, Ontario, had almost given up trying to find accommodation when a room in the Peggy Forward house was listed. Forward's son is going to school back east this fall, and she decided to rent out his room. With 3 meals a day, it'll go for $300 a month. But not everyone is that lucky.
Where are you from?
From Halifax.
How long have you been looking?
Been looking for a week now.
And how does the situation look?
It doesn't look very good at all.
How much are you going to have to pay?
About $400 for 2 people.
Basement suite?
Yeah, most likely, without a kitchen.
The people who run BC's colleges and universities are worried their enrollments are going to drop if out-of-town and out-of-province students stop coming to the West Coast because of the scarcity and high cost of housing. Russ Patrick, CBC News, Vancouver.
For more on this, we're now joined by Emmanuel Adegboyega. He is the president of the Simon Fraser Student Society, and we appreciate you coming in today. First of all, how much housing does Simon Fraser University have for the students? And do you have enough?
Yeah, so we definitely do not have enough. We have roughly a little bit over 3,000 beds for SFU students, and that's for the undergraduate student population. But again, you could see the drastic difference between how much beds we have available and how many students we have. We have over 25,000 undergraduate students.
And how long is the waiting list for that on-campus housing?
So currently we have several hundreds of people on the wait list because, we have about 3,000 beds. And at the end of it all, we have a lot of international students coming in. We have a lot of out-of-province students coming in. And then yearly, we see these numbers continue to rise. And that's why we continue to push for more advocacy with more beds for students as well.
Now, that's on campus. What's happening with the off-campus housing?
Yeah, off-campus, we have a lot of students, mostly international students and out-of-province students again, because, students are local. They could go from home. They have friends they could stay with. But international students, they do not have that. And we find students are coming in and they go off-campus, and landlords are asking for things like, experience, Canadian experience. And
experience?
Correct. Job experience where they could get a reference letter in order to get housing. Wow. And then another part is they're asking for credit scores. International students don't have that.
Right.
So, the odds are stacked against international students, and they're having to live off campus because there's not as much on-campus housing. And then we could see those numbers also continue to rise with out-of-province students where they're having to compete. And when you look at the odds, that international students simply cannot play in the same game of off-campus housing.
And we have heard reports that students were, in fact, some of them forced to sleep outdoors. Was that at SFU?
Correct. So
where were they, and how many?
Yeah, so, many times I live on campus myself, so I get to walk from work, I will get to work back to residence, and most times I get to see students that actually live on campus. And when I say on campus, not residents, in academic buildings. And then I'm walking through and I see students with luggages piled up, and in order for them to just spend the night. And, these buildings where we find students spending time overnight is where there's lower security surveillance. And that's very strategic of the students, because if security sees them, they'll be asked to leave because they're not welcome to sleep on campus overnight. So we've seen series of cases like that, and predominantly we find that those are students that are in the category of people that's an emphasis in our advocacy, which is international students and out-of-province students.
And in the time we have left, what do you want, given that situation, what do you want the university to do in this case? What are you pushing them to do?
Yeah, so we're pushing for more beds, but we know that more beds simply will not solve the situation, because it would take, approximately 2 to 3 years for those bills to come up. And so that's the case. So we advocate for a diversified solution, one that includes both city council, one that includes the provincial government and also the federal government. We know universities cannot simply fund this alone, so we're asking for a unified solution. And then we're also pushing for things like home share. We have a lot of elderly adults that have vacant rooms, so we're asking that the province, the university pushes for those beds to be open to undergrad students. We're also asking for city council to also look at rezoning around university campus to allow private sector to step into the student housing.
All right. Emmanuel Adegboyega, we really appreciate your time and your perspective. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.